In this episode of Outcome by Design, I interview Andrew McCollum, CEO of Philo and one of the original founders of Facebook. In contrast to the usual hero's journey where the protagonist struggles against seemingly unsurmountable odds, only to triumph in the end, in Andrew's case, this success came first with Facebook when he was still in college, and the struggle later in his post-Facebook entrepreneurial life. Andrew reflects on which lessons learned from Facebook held true for Philo and which didn't, and the importance of keeping a beginner's mind. We also speak about the pressure to grow quickly and the expectations that come with early success. Let's get into it. My guest today is the CEO of TV cord-cutting pioneer Philo, Andrew McCollum. In addition to his current role as CEO of Philo, Andrew is one of the original 5 founders of Facebook, an active angel investor, and a truly insightful thinker. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks. Yeah, happy to be here.
So just a little background. We talked about this before, but what we do here at Outcome by Design is to try to get a better understanding of the why of things. Not the obvious kind of backward-looking analysis that usually gets written up in business books where, in hindsight, everything seems inevitable, but kind of the messy, real-life, somewhat unsexy version of it, really. That's actually the interesting part for me. That's the part that I find kind of fascinating. Now, what I love about your background is that the wild success is at the beginning of the story, not at the end. It's kind of like a reverse hero's journey. So obviously, you founded one of the most successful companies in Silicon Valley of all time. And you and your teammates, you made great choices along the way. And, you get 100% credit for all that. Amazing story. But, honestly, in terms of, entrepreneurship and what we can learn from that, I don't know. I just don't know. What I think is more interesting is how that experience has affected your thinking on your future products. So in my experience, entrepreneurs who had success in their careers to take that experience and try to kind of replicate it. And it rarely works because everything is just different. On the one hand, your Facebook experience obviously opened a ton of doors for you. And, for Philo, I'm sure it's easier to get money and hire people and, get the meetings that you want to get. But on the other hand, I wonder if it made some things harder that you didn't have to go through that usual struggle that tends to help entrepreneurs kind of clarify what their business really is all about. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think there's like a really kind of basic, almost prosaic answer to that, where I think it's not that different from everybody else who has successes and failures and takes lessons from those things. And sometimes the lessons are right and sometimes the lessons are wrong or don't apply to the new situation. But I do think, your point that when you're involved with an endeavor like Facebook that ends up being very successful, there is a lot of this sort of backward looking analysis where certain decisions end up getting treated like they're, genius, amazing insights, when at the time maybe it could have gone it could have gone different ways, or it's sort of just a accident of history that it turned out the way that it did. But I mean, I do also think in there are a lot of really valuable insights and learnings and decisions made along the way too. And so I try to spend a lot of time thinking about that exact thing, about how to not sort of over apply the lessons. One example in that category is like Facebook was a company and a product that basically had to do zero marketing for the first many years of its existence. It grew, virally very fast with no paid marketing. And like, that's not a recipe that works for a lot of businesses and products, So if you're part of something like Facebook and your lesson is, wow, if we just build a great product, it will grow on its own and we don't have to pay to market it. And if anything, Facebook in the early days would have viewed it as like a bug or a problem if we felt like we had to pay to market the product. That would be an indicator we weren't building the right things and creating something that was engaging. And if that was your lesson, which probably, for some period of time, I might have even said that after Facebook, but I've had to sort of unlearn that and realize, no, actually, like most products, you have to, invest in marketing and aren't just going to grow extremely fast virally on their own.
Right. I'm just curious. To that particular marketing question, actually, so when you came into Philo, did you think if we just build this great product that I envision in my mind that marketing will take care of itself, or did you know coming into that it was going to be a completely different thing?
I mean, I think where a lot of this stuff plays out is it's less binary than that. It's sort of, I do think I'm a very product and user centric leader, and I came into, from the earliest days of Philo, I believed that those things were really important. Building a great experience, building great technology to enable that experience being really key parts of our success. And I think that's a different approach than you could take with a business like ours, where you could say, we're a TV company and people are not using us for the technology. So, like, we're going to outsource that to vendors. And instead, we're going to focus on, being really great at doing content analysis or creating original programming or, or marketing. Those are like, that's the DNA of the company. And I think I bring a very product and experience oriented focus to Philo. And there are definitely times when I think, am I over optimizing for that stuff or spending too much time or emphasizing it too much when actually and neglecting other parts of the business, like, paid acquisition, for example, or marketing. But it's probably not like that. I thought, I don't think I ever thought that Philo was going to be a company that would never have to have any paid marketing. I think I had already learned that lesson, or would have been able to work through that pretty quick. But there's still this sort of like, where do you fall on the spectrum? And I think that, you're constantly thinking about, like, am I taking the lessons of the past and over relying on them, or picking the wrong kind of approach because I have that bias.
Yeah, I would think that maybe the only difference between your journey here and another entrepreneur who had multiple projects under his belt is that, yeah, it's probably just one of scale, right? I mean, so I wonder if there was the pressure for you, either you felt from yourself or you got from employees or board members or investors or what have you, to just grow super fast from the very beginning without necessarily having that usual time that entrepreneurs kind of flail about for a little bit, trying to kind of find the whatever you want to call it, product market fit, or how to do it.
It's really interesting. I think there's a Andrew answer and there's a Philo answer to that, which is like, personally, it is really weird to have basically the very first thing you do professionally be overwhelmingly likely to be the biggest and most successful thing you'll do for your entire life from a work perspective, at least from a financial outcome perspective. That's a weird thing, to be like, whatever else I do, the chance it's going to be, anywhere near the impact of Facebook is extremely low. That is an interesting thing psychologically, and how that affects how you approach things in the future. I mean, for me personally, it's mostly good, in that I think I already had a preference for trying to take on ambitious things. That I love working on products that have a big impact on people's lives and are sort of core parts of the human experience. It's what drew me to Philo. TV is like the most engaging consumer product ever created. People spend like 4 to 5 hours a day watching long form entertainment content. It's like more time than they spend on anything else, other than like all internet usage or all mobile phone usage put together. So I already had a preference for working on that kind of stuff, and the experience at Facebook reinforced that and gave me the ability to continue doing that, beyond, which is super valuable. I mean, certainly having to figure out what does success mean after you've been part of something that was so massively successful early on is sometimes challenging. The Philo answer is really interesting too, though, because I think, you mentioned that one downside might be expectations, and certainly there's an element of that where it's like, if you're involved with Facebook, there's high expectations for the thing you do next, and that can be tricky. But the flip side is also true, where like, Philo actually creating a new streaming TV service is not easy, and particularly, the company's now over 10 years old. And in the early period when Philo was first getting created, it just was not possible to go to the big television programmers and get them to agree to let you do a internet delivered live TV service. It wasn't possible for anybody, much less like someone who had no industry experience, no users, no capital, like a startup, upstart company. And so I do think that one benefit of my background, having been involved with Facebook, is that I was able to get more patience actually on the part of investors and people who are around the company, maybe also potentially people, television programming partners may have taken us more seriously or whatever, or listened when we talked about what we were trying to do to innovate the product and experience in a different way. But there was like, Philo took 5 years to get to the point where it finally launched publicly, more than 5 years. And so having the background that I did probably made our investors willing to kind of see it through a pretty rough and long kind of period before we were able to finally deliver the kind of product that we envisioned and built the company for on day one. And so that was a huge benefit and a real advantage and a privilege of having that success. So that's the positive side of it.
I wonder, if this is sensitive, you don't have to tell me, but what were those early board meetings like? You had 5 years before you actually had a real kind of consumer product out there. Did your investors, board members give you a hard time, or they just leave you alone? Because I imagine if you were, first time entrepreneur, they would have been on you, right?
It took longer than we would have wanted, and TV is very resistant to innovation and very hostile to incumbents. So every step of the plan has been slower than we would have wanted, and that we probably would have drawn it up. But it's, in some ways, it's remarkable that it hasn't changed more, or that we haven't had to sort of pivot in a bigger way along the way. So I think that there were that slowness, though. Slowness is the death of many companies. It's sort of the cardinal sin of a startup. So certainly it's not comfortable when things are taking a lot longer than you'd like, and you're not able to sort of like grow and scale and even deliver the fundamental product you want to deliver. TV service in college is not really an investable venture idea, I don't think. And so, we weren't even like in the business we needed to be in, and much less have the scale we wanted. That's certainly has a lot of challenges, but I think having that vision and believing in it and continuing to make progress and show the promise of it, was important to kind of get us through that really long kind of incubation period to get to where we are today.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Um, so again, I keep poking on this idea of like what makes your experience as an entrepreneur maybe different than, or not different than somebody else who didn't have that early success. So I'm guessing that, getting out of bed in the morning and, money and, providing college education for your kids and all that sort of stuff isn't really kind of what is important to you anymore. But at the end of the day, you're still running a venture-backed business. So it's still, in some sense or another, you can talk about the vision, but it's all about returning something to your investors and yourself and your employees. It's a business, right? So, back to my earlier question for you, like, what are you trying to achieve here in the end? Is it you want this thing to be super financially successful? Because that's the alignment that, typically you have with your investors. They keep you hungry and, they want you to be successful because you're successful, they're successful. But I wonder if it's something else too, because I've talked to people, maybe not in your exact circumstances, but something similar, where they've had some sort of success and they've gone on to do something else. And a lot of it from their perspective, I found, was they're trying to, prove either to themselves or to the world that the earlier success wasn't just some sort of fluke, that, they really are smart or industrious or what have you, right? Something about them, was good at what this was, right? And, sometimes it's just intellectual curiosity. They have some project they're really interested. It could be a for-profit, it could be a nonprofit, whatever it happens to be. And that's what motivated them, get them out in the morning. It's the problem thinking, problem solving aspect of it. So I'm just curious, what is it for you? Do you even think about that, or am I totally off base here?
No, I mean, I definitely have a healthy inferiority complex. It's like, and even predating my entrepreneurial career, it's like, especially, you go to a place like Harvard, and you're always like asking yourself, like, am I the fluke, or like, like whatever. There's all these other, amazingly talented people around, and can I hang? But I mean, I do think that, to think about like how my experience is different, I think it kind of gets to what I was just talking about a little bit again, where, um, it's both things. Both, I was able to have, maybe, like I said, sort of the the patience and the support of our investors and the people around the company to see us through this long kind of birthing period of the product we kind of build the business on today. But I also believe that having that, as I said, having that long-term vision about what we were trying to do, this big idea of trying to reinvent television, was really critical to getting to where we are today, and to being willing to fight through that period. Like, if you started Philo with the idea that you were going to spend 3 years on it and flip it, sell it to some company and for a big outcome, that would have failed spectacularly, because not only could you not do it that fast, but by having that as your focus, I think it would have led you down the wrong path, or I feel like it would have led us down the wrong path. And so, I think that the ability, the interest in sort of having that very long term view of what we're trying to build and create, which is to like reinvent television, I view that as really instrumental to our success. And I also think that the experience of having been involved in Facebook bought me a little bit of time and credit and goodwill to be able to make it happen. But I do think that the the longer term vision is, um, also really vital for what we were trying to create and what we have created. Um, because you just couldn't have done it faster. There just wasn't a version of Philo that was like, build this thing and then sell it in 4 years to someone else for whatever a nice outcome. But I mean, I totally, I personally, did, come to Philo because of that vision, and that is what my passion and what animates me. And I would say that I'm not immune to the ideas of like, I want this to be successful so I can prove to myself in the world that, you know, uh, Facebook wasn't a fluke, or I wasn't just along for the ride or whatever. Certainly, there's that psychology of it, and no one is completely uninfluenced by sort of like, fame and riches and success and admiration of the world. But I'd say that I personally, I think that the idea of just being really passionate about wanting to reinvent this experience and this medium that affects a lot of people's lives is definitely sort of front and center for me, and what gets me up every morning and gets me excited about doing what I do. And to the extent that those other things do influence me like everybody else, I try to kind of push those things back to the back of my mind when it seems like that's what's causing me to do what I'm doing. Not just because I think it takes you down the wrong path, but also I think there lies madness if you are trying to do everything you're doing to get credit and fame and money. I think that it will not lead you to a happy place as a person. And and first and foremost, I want to live a satisfied and happy life.
Yeah, that leads to me another question. But before I ask that, I mean, you mentioned this to me earlier when we spoke about, having to and wanting to, make this successful for all your other team members too. I imagine that's a kind of big driver. You want to,
Yeah, that was really a sort of surprising revelation to me. I do think that when um, I was involved with Philo from the beginning. I wasn't the CEO from day one. I was an angel investor advisor in the very early part of the company, and then joined at the time. Before I joined Philo full time, I was doing a lot of angel investing and advising, and I had this really kind of stubborn, you know, notion that the next thing I did, the next company, the next project I did, I was gonna completely found myself and build the whole team and do a lot, set it up in a very, particular way and self-funded and all this stuff, and um, ended up finding the other co-founders of Philo who had this idea and really falling in love with it. So it was kind of different than I kind of kept coming back to this idea. It was still the biggest and most interesting thing, and I felt like I was a good leader for the company. So then I eventually did step into leading it, even though that wasn't my plan. But when I did that, if you'd asked me, I would have said, yeah, I'm going to be totally focused on this idea of reinventing television. That's why I'm doing this. And I'm going to make every decision along the way to try to guide us to that outcome, that sort of like long term outcome. And I think what I found is that that idea of I want to make this successful because it's not just me, it's a whole group of people who are pouring their lives into this. And especially in the early days, working at below market salaries and having equity being a big part of their compensation, and you know choosing to do this over other things they could have done with their lives and their careers, and wanting to make sure that there is also a financial outcome for those folks, for the team, is a became a very significant influence on my thinking about the company that I didn't totally expect or anticipate when I originally stepped into the role. So that's definitely true.
yeah, I mean, I think it's like becoming a parent or something. All of a sudden, there's this whole new set of things that you care about. You're like, whoa, where did that all come from? I get it. I get it now. Um, I want to ask you one more question about entrepreneurship, but you said something I want to poke on a little bit. I'm curious about. I mean, you talk about the vision of reinventing television for Philo, but what is it that drove you to want to do that or think about that to begin with? Is it, you just thought your TV experience sucked, or, you wanted it and you thought that, having to get all these things through a cable provider or through some other bundler just made no sense? Whatever part of it that made you really want to get so motivated to do something about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think one part of it is that I did always hate the experience of cable TV, and being a sort of consumer product a sort of consumer product person. It did always drive me crazy how broken fundamentally that experience was. I mean, like, um, I remember it's like I got married in 2012, and I was on our honeymoon in Africa, and it was like we were staying in these camps, in the middle of like the savannah in Africa, or the Okavango Delta in Botswana, and in this camp that's like, it has power and stuff. It's not like it's not primitive, but it's certainly like not super connected. You could use your Kindle to connect to the cellular network and like download any book you wanted in the middle of Africa for free, and yet like books were more advanced than TV. If you wanted to like watch a TV show, it's like good luck. There's like you wouldn't even know where to start in that situation. Or even in downtown San Francisco, you're talking to your friend, you're like, hey, I really watch a show. It's like, what do you even do at that point? There's no way to send it to them. You might not even know where to get it, how to get the whatever app you need to download, or where you can watch it, especially when Philo got started. It's slightly better today, but still not great. So that the frustration of that product experience, and how much better it could be if you could drag TV kicking and screaming into the streaming age, was always really animating and interesting to me, and frustrating as a consumer. And that's sort of, um, I like, I think it's, I like building products that are based on needs and things that I can identify with and understand. I mean, I do think also love working on products, like I said, that are a big part of people's lives and affect people in a large way. You know, Facebook about social connection and relationships. Obviously, that's a universal experience. I've invested and been part of food companies and you know clothing, fashion companies, and transportation, and accommodation, where you're living, and you know all these sort of fundamental parts of the human experience. I think are really interesting to think about, to work on from a product perspective, and really what I'm passionate about. And TV is like, I mentioned that being like the most engaging consumer product ever created. I mean, even right now at Philo, if you look at how much people use our product versus like the size of our company, it's like every 5 or 6 weeks, for every person at the company, there is like a human lifetime of engagement with the product, like every 5 or 6 weeks. So it's like, what thing could I do that would, no thing is too small that I couldn't improve a literal human lifetime of time by just making our product, 0.1% better. Like literally, people are going to be using it, for our entire lifetime, for me and for every single other person at the company. And that is just, it's really inspiring, really motivating, really interesting. And I love working on those types of problems. And so, yeah, I think that's ultimately what drew me to Philo as an idea, and what drew me to TV as an idea even before Philo was like kind of thinking about that and thinking about how you can make it better. Um, and yeah, feeling like every time I had to call Comcast, it ruined my whole week. I'm like, man, just building something that was, you know, save people from the pain of that is like, the charitable aim of the company. It's just, freeing people from the tyranny of the terrible experience with traditional cable operators.
Yeah, I get it. No, that makes sense. I mean, so it's really, you're driven not by like you saw a financial opportunity, like I could make money doing this better. It was more like there's just a product need, and then the financial part of it, you will figure out later. But there's a gaping hole in the experience that could be done much better.
Yeah, I think that's, one one other nice thing about working on sort of products that affect these sort of basic parts of the human experience is that if you're successful at it and you can build something that's better, there's always a way to turn it into a business. And in fact, you know, part of what Facebook believed and what I also believe is that that's not even in conflict, because making it a business helps you to scale it and have a bigger, more positive effect, ideally, on the thing you care about. Now, obviously, I guess, now, maybe earlier on in Facebook's life, more people would have agreed that it's positive and you want to scale that experience out. And maybe there's more discussion about that, in that specific case now. But I do think that idea that like creating a business to align yourself with the interests of your users and try to make something better for them, and use that as a vehicle to get a group of people together to do something that's ambitious, and using and the compounding effect that a startup creates, it all kind of self supports and works together. And so that's, I think that stuff all ends up being like very aligned when you're working on these kind of sort of fundamental things. Maybe less so than uh, like an enterprise product, where it's like, okay, well, what matters is that I'm like really great at selling this thing, and it's not so important that like it's great to use, like that the people actually using the service are less important, that like that's a delightful experience, for them. I think it's when you're working on these kind of basic human things, it's easier to kind of bring those things into alignment.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely, I can see that perspective from where you come from. I mean, I did a bunch of work with Comcast some years ago, and I remember Ryan Roberts, the CEO, he had a completely different way of looking at things. It was all about where you extract the money and what barriers you put up to prevent your competitors from coming in, which kind of makes sense from his perspective, right? Because he's coming at it not so much from the user perspective and wanting to create something, but he's a business guy. He's all about market share and stock price and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it helps when you have a government issued monopoly. Effectively, it's like a good example of why monopoly scenarios can change your alignment on some of those things.
Yeah, I mean, for me, all these discussions are all about understanding confirmation bias, where somebody comes from, and how that influences their, decisions. So, with that in mind, I have one more question I want to ask you. And again, this is kind of the difference. I think a lot of founders would be curious of how you fall on the spectrum. Entrepreneurship can be a very, lonely journey. And if you're an entrepreneur, hopefully you have a co-founder or somebody else you can kind of share that experience with. But even then, if you're the CEO, it's kind of at the core something of a solitary journey. Now, I know your success has put you in a different position than most founders. But what I'd like to know is, if you still suffer from that thing that Elon Musk called staring into the abyss and chewing broken glass. Do you still, either in the beginning of the journey or even now, do you feel that kinship with those founders who are just like living in a constant state of anxiety about their future and the future of the company, and have their whole self tied up in these things?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think that, I talked about sort of some of the insecurity pieces and the psychological parts of it, but I do think that that is really what the distinction for me between founding something and just a job is the nature with which your identity becomes wrapped up with the company and the work, and it becomes totally deeply personal in a way that it isn't. Even if you're very early at a company, you're invested in the success, maybe financially invested, but also you want it to do well and you care about it. But ultimately you kind of know that you could just sort of like, go get a different job if you really needed to. And both the company would probably survive without you, and you have that option. Whereas when you start something, it hits in a totally different way, where it really feels like the weight rests on your shoulders, and also your own self-worth and all these other things are going to be measured by you and by others, maybe, by the success or failure of this thing. And that is really, I think that does make it really tough. It can also be really motivating because you like really don't want it to fail, because you don't want people to think you're a failure, and you don't want to let your team down and all of that. So it's not all bad, but it can be really hard, and often is, and it is always a huge roller coaster ride. Even something like Facebook, which was, from all outside sort of observation, just like sort of a rocket ship success, there were huge swings and ups and downs and really tough times. So it doesn't matter how successful the thing is; it's still like really hard, and challenging, and you still have moments where you're like, "Wow, is this whole thing gonna implode?" So it's interesting that there's no. It just kind of comes with the territory. I think it definitely helps if you have people you can uh, talk to and who you can kind of share that burden with, co-founders, advisors, people who have been there before and you can identify with, even just vent to. Obviously, like a partner, a significant other, maybe their limit for listening to it is finite, but definitely can help having someone to be able to talk to you about it. But yeah, it is always really hard, and it is definitely not for everybody. You have to really decide if you're the type of person who wants to take that on. Not speaking about Elon Musk or anyone specifically, but I think like deep seated insecurity is probably underappreciated factor of really extreme success. Because actually, like, really extreme success, like, to create a company that is like, reaches ultimately really massive scale, it's it is incredibly difficult. It involves a lot of really significant sacrifices, personal sacrifices and choices you're making to devote that much of your time and energy to something. And so what is going to make you do that? Lots of other people will sit in the same situation, even if they had the opportunity to create something really successful. I think a lot of people sort of think, well, obviously everybody would do that. Like, if you had the chance to start a $1 billion company, like, yeah, definitely you're going to do that. But I think that's actually not true. Like, a lot of people, when it comes to, do I want to give up my nights and weekends? Do I want to put my personal relationships in peril or lose them? Prioritize my company over my, starting a family or whatever it is that is competing with the business or the startup, the venture you're working on. A lot of people would choose to say, like, I don't need to start $1 billion company. I can just, like, have a nice comfortable life and a good paycheck, and like, have a reasonable work-life balance, and be happy. And to be willing to sort of, like, give a lot of those things up, or prioritize the challenging work of building a successful company. You probably do have to have at least, maybe I'm just projecting for myself, but I feel like having some insecurity that sort of makes you feel like you have to do it for whatever psychological reasons is probably, again, a factor people don't often talk about in the mix of success. It's sort of all phrased as sort of your genius and ability and your grit and determination and all that, and people don't talk about these kind of, like, quote unquote negative psychological attributes that probably are, like, maybe equally, or in some cases more important to, like, being able to actually do it.
You've been listening to Outcome by Design with Paul Weinstein. Don't miss any of our upcoming stories from the tech world. Subscribe to Outcome by Design wherever you get your podcasts. And if you enjoyed this episode, leave us a quick review. You can also send your comments directly to info@paulvweinstein.com. Until next time.